What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. Lead hero designer Alec Dawson did an interview with Flats and Emongg on stream today, giving further dev comments on today's patch that nerfed 4 meta heroes, but also a lot of information about things coming in the near and far future. Season 3 is in 2 weeks. We'll talk first about the upcoming changes and then go into depth about today's patch for what we'll be playing for the next few weeks. The devs have been really trying to crack down on the one-shot kills in the game. Hog and Sojourn got nerfed today, but they're also looking at Junkrat, Hanzo, and Widowmaker. Maybe Widowmaker's health is too high at 200, making her feel undiveable. They've had it at 175 before, but back then, Sojourn was perceived to be anyway stronger than she is now, with more range, so I think that's why they might be considering to put her back to that 175, rather glass value. But considering she can quickly be healed by Mercy and Kiriko, maybe that'll be fair for the one-shot kill potential that she holds in her hands. Based on how Alec answered the question about Junkrat, it sounds like he's okay with his lethality at close range, including the mine combo, which can sort of one-shot, but they are looking at the Junkrat spam rolling on the floor from range, and in general, just ranged one-shots as an idea. This was a part of Junk's kit that I clued into pretty early that I think most players weren't realizing how much power it is to stand in cover and launching nades that have like hold physical space into enemies' cover. Super annoying and oppressive, and far too easy, frankly. I think it'd be totally fine if Junk was more about hitting shots that you're looking at rather than placing nades to kind of linger where you can't even see anyway. That's just BS in my opinion. But even as weak as Hanzo is, Alec mentioned that maybe he won't be able to one-shot at super long ranges, so maybe he gets a range decrease. But I assume when he says that they'll probably look to buff him up elsewhere, because in my eyes, he's got to be one of the weakest heroes in the game. But remember, a lot of times when the devs talk about changes like this, it's not just about the performance in the meta, but the playability and the feel of it. And so as a general principle, they want one-shots to feel fair and have to balance that through the skill it takes to hit a small target from across the map. So it's certainly a delicate balance. And they want you to feel like you have counterplay available, which, because of how gigabuffed Hog's been, there wasn't really much counterplay for the top meta characters this past season. When asked about the Brig changes we've heard about forever, the effects and art team are still working on it, so it won't be for season 3, which is in 2 weeks, but for season 4, looking good. So she's gonna have new abilities come season 4. Well, at least a new ultimate. My guess is that it isn't going to be something that sort of is a duration over time, but instead a big play, whether that's aggressive or defensive or something like that. The devs say they're working on Sombra, but that's gonna take some time because it's not just data changes, probably new abilities it sounds like, as well as an actual rework to some of the team utility of Roadhog. I was very happy to hear that the changes to Hog we got in today's patch wasn't the actual rework they've been talking about. So I was right in assuming they were looking to get some team utility, which sounds good to me. Mercy is not on the chopping block or in the devs' Eye of Sauron right now because they want to look at the game holistically. They knew that the Guardian Angel changes were going to be a power boost to her, and it was sort of overshadowed by stronger supports in season 1. She rose to prominence in season 2, but they want to look at things holistically in the context of the game, which I think is the right call. I think something that we're gonna have to think about with Mercy's balance though is that she's kind of best countered by hit scans when she used to be sort of diveable, but with the movement power she has, it gets us kind of easily into a you must mirror a hit scan type meta. Because of how much mid-air control she has now, you're just not going to expect a projectile hero to reliably counter her. So I think that's something for us all to think about moving forward. Season 3 is coming in 2 weeks, and they're looking at the tanks in the non-roll queue modes. It's annoying when Roadhog gets played in deathmatch, of course. They've said in the past that they might tweak the health values globally for them so they don't seem like the easiest pick in the game, which is really going to matter to make open queue playable. I mean, I refuse to even play that mode right now because I ain't trying to play World of Tanks. We had enough of that in Overwatch 1. Something they're looking at as a concept is how often ultimates come up and the frequency of their use. In my opinion, a major culprit to that is the 30% retain on hero swap for your ultimate, which Alec does say is going to be getting a minor nerf in season 3. They like the idea in principle, but admit it is too strong at the moment. On stream, Emongg said he likes it, but Flats and I see more eye to eye with this. I agree with him that the rock, paper, scissors counter picking tank metagame is really bad, which is kind of weird because I like flex picking and counter picking as DPS. That's probably the only thing I'm good at in that role. But because the tank matchup is so much about how the rest of your team gets to play, you're just not really allowed to exist in a bad matchup. Whereas the other roles can find avenues to outplay more easily because their skill set is more on aim as opposed to their cooldowns themselves are just what their character is. I have armor, I don't have armor, I have a shield, I don't have a shield. Those matchups are more harsh and just rock, paper, scissors in nature, I feel. Flats is always nagging about Reinhardt buffs. Season 3, it looks like he's going to be getting a Fire Strike buff. Personally, I wish they collected data on the next couple weeks on this hotfix before we worry about rebalancing things too crazy. We'll talk more about this patch in the last part of the video. From what I've talked to with my friends, everyone seems a little bit split on how effective this patch is going to be. I feel it's going to be very effective, like meta turning on its head effective. Others aren't so convinced. So I think we need to get some data on this before we commit to balancing in a couple weeks when we don't really know what's going to happen on the current patch, but that's just me. Junkerqueen is not going to be getting any changes because her performance did get a boost after those previous buffs, and contextually against other tanks now, she'll have better matchups since Orisa and Roadhog are dropping down a peg. In my opinion, Hog is useless, and you'd rather just play Junkerqueen in the same situations all the time. That's my guess on the meta anyway. Others still seem to think the synergies you have to protect Hog will make him still viable because they weren't trying to gut the hero, but I'm kind of unconvinced. I think if Hog doesn't one-shot and he's just sort of a good teammate who helps you CC and shoots a lot, I think you'd much rather have Commanding Shout play faster. Junkerqueen self-heal is good again. Not as good as Roadhog Vape, but the Commanding Shout utility for the team is just overwhelming if Hog isn't getting one-shots against her. They talked about Ramattra, and the devs are surprised that his ultimate is not a bigger deal in the community because they think it's outrageous. The whole Ramattra Forever playstyle where you get both of them blocking ulting forever, it's kind of silly and over the top. So they're considering putting a time cap on the ultimate. Maybe forever was a bit too much. I think the community's not so obsessed with Ramattra's ultimate because his neutral game isn't oppressive, really. It's incredibly fair as far as I'm concerned. It's not like Hog where he insta one hits you. He's got to build up to do his thing and has to do a series of outplays to really make a big impact in the neutral game, which I think is great gameplay. And I think that difficulty is why we're kind of okay with his ult being over the top. But yeah, ulting forever, it's just silly, regardless of the power of it. I don't like that it feasts on my teammates' mistakes, and the ult can last through multiple team fights. So maybe the team fight was fully over. Just jump into the Ram ult and die together. Let the ult finish. But teammates often will stay in a losing fight against the Ram ult, still healing their tank who can't die, but you got picked elsewhere. They don't really leave the fight. They don't really die either. I hate the stagger fight effect. I don't think the ult should last between two team fights. That's over the top. When talking about the hero role passives, it's something they'll look at in the long term. I think it's impossible to talk about the playability of support without talking about the role passive for them, but I've said this enough in other videos that I won't go into depth. I think it's a bit of a skill floor and skill ceiling problem, and in general, the role passives just disproportionately affect different heroes and don't have the desired effect of making the game easier to balance. I don't think it's done that, but don't expect any changes on this for a long time because it's such a big change to how you play the game. I kind of like this answer. They're going to look at it from 6 months to like a year. I definitely don't want them changing the role passives every season to be radically different. It changes the game too much. I'd rather get it in a good state that we like and leave it there. That being said, the role passive for support makes Kiriko, Moira, and Lucio way better and doesn't actually help Ana, Zen, Baptiste as much as you'd think. And mobility heroes would already be good in Overwatch 2 is my issue. When asked about Genji, there will not be any changes, mainly because he is performing better than perception. He's popular and doing well, is what Alec Dawson said. But they are looking at the problem of a lot of his power still being in his blade, and they might put more power back in the neutral, like the ammo or damage, which was the nerfs they gave him previously. So on this subject, I know almost for certain he's got to be talking about the average player's experience, because Genji's not good at the higher tiers, and as a general principle, DPS ults is a higher percentage of the class's value in the average player's games, and ults in general for that matter. But having a transformation ult with double jumping, I mean, players struggle to hit flying characters in general in the middle ranks, so the outplays to beat Dragon Blade are less common there. And think about it, a lot of average level players might not even select the right heroes for the job to counter Blade at all. And when that happens, it's just sort of like the easiest kills in the game, which is why there's a bit of a split in the community of high-ranked players who want Genji to be good and know how to outplay him, and the average player who maybe doesn't have much of an idea and it just seems like a free win button. So the devs really have a hard time balancing this character because the perceptions of him are so different between the high-level hardcore player base and the more casual or lower-ranked one, because the potential of his kit is so high and the contexts of the game are so different. If you don't know how to counter it, Nano Blade feels like one of the easiest ways to win the game. Wrecking Ball is going to be getting some changes in Season Season 3, which is just a couple weeks away, remember. While they want to be careful with him because he is very frustrating if meta, sort of like Roadhog in the same way. Too tanky, too much burst damage, too hard to interact with. You don't want Ball to be meta, really. Alex said they're trying some shield changes where he'll regain some health over time rather than needing to fully go in and out. This is a very promising idea, I think, because a big problem Ball has in Overwatch 2 is the tank role in general needs to hold their ground a lot more than they used to, because the game is a little bit simpler in what you expect the roles to do. Whereas in Overwatch 1, there's a huge difference between what a GOATS comp and what a triple DPS comp wanted to do. One plays the objective and the other stays completely off it always. While there's a little bit of that in Overwatch 2, in general, you don't have to make that severe trade-off on your tank because the team comps are just less severe. And all the tanks play the objective somewhat in Overwatch 2, as opposed to 1 where they wanted to avoid it entirely, some of them. As Alec describes it, I think this will mean Ball can hold the front line a bit longer as opposed to needing to fully dive in and fully dive out, leaving a lot of downtime where your team just kind of gets run over by any tank in between your engages. Unless your Ball player is incredible right now or the enemy make mistakes to get feasted on by him, it can feel like you just don't have a tank while the enemy does and you all die. It's rough. My advice if you're playing with a Wrecking Ball, you got to pick a mobility character and just flank your way to victory. Hard flank and try to sync with him and just avoid their tank at all costs. Now let's add some further developer comments on the 4 meta heroes that got nerfed today. Alec Dawson explains that Roadhog couldn't get fixed in all this time because the hotfix system was broken for 3 heroes, including Roadhog. So a bit unfortunate on that regard. Roadhog will be getting a further rework to his team utility, which I'm very excited about. That sounds something similar to the 132 experiment where they added a fart cloud to his take a breather, which made his teammates more durable inside it. Considering what they gave Junkerqueen with an area of effect, I think we'll see another type of thing for Roadhog that's similar on breather, a different status effect buff of some kind. An extension of the one-hit kill discussion, Alec Dawson explains that Roadhog won't be able to one-shot certain characters like Mei, where you'll pull her in shooter and she'll almost always be able to freeze without dying, but he thinks in general, if you get hooked, you're still gonna die. He describes some examples of shooting the right click first, the ranged ult fire to hit the target, weaken them, pull them in, then you can primary fire yourself, but also your team can help you finish a target that's getting hooked. In general now, because he has a faster fire rate and more ammo, his gun is more important than his hook. So you're shooting a lot more. I'm personally just not convinced because I think Junkerqueen's shotgun is way more effective at that same job and has an extra ability for the team and plays faster and a million other things. Like, think about it. Jagged Blade is a pretty legit crowd control. Like, it's surprising how effective it is at shutting down an enemy tank, and it gets them at a similar range to what this Roadhog hook is intended to do for your team and adds bleed to her. In my opinion, Hog's not going to compete until he gets this rework and added utility, but we'll see. When talking about the Orisa nerfs, and I say plural because she has less health in Fortify normally, but also the Fortify that she gets in her ultimate, Alec explains they're trying to make her more vulnerable when she hard W's into your backline. Opinions seem to be a bit split on Orisa because in theory, her stats and tankiness are so good. In my opinion, with Hog being bad, a lot of the shield and movement-based tanks will be a lot better. So much so that I just can't see you wanting to pick Orisa in every map, in every situation. There's no way. Will also depend the map pool we get in Season 3. Talking about Sojourn now in depth, Alec Dawson explains that they wanted to get her railgun up less often, but keep her identity of the railgun. Now, getting 5 railgun charge per bullet on her primary fire sounded a bit confusing, and Alec explains it more in depth, whereas before it was damage based, and in fact you got 50% charge per damage done, except far less against shields and turrets and things like that. There's a massive reduction modifier on that, which he did explain later is still in effect, by the way. So farming shields and turrets are still not so good for gaining charge, but the big difference here is, if you think about it, old Sojourn did 10 damage, so at the very least you would have got 5 charge from her shots anyway, but it could also headshot and be damage amped. None of that matters anymore, so you're simply getting rail up less often across the board, and you're getting less synergy from damage amp effects. Discord Orb, Nano Boost, Mercy Beam, none of that will help you get rail more often. Now, it does affect the breakpoint, obviously, so it's not like damage boosts are bad on Sojourn. It lets her one hit with the rail, which is important, and they kept the 20% faster railgun shot rate on her ultimate, which to me is overkill. Overclock is overkill, guys. I don't like that ult being that spammy personally. What I think this will mainly do is change the Mercy players' priorities. There's not as as much value, or pretty much none, in pocketing Sojourn in the front line before she has her ult, but still be insane when she does have the ult. A lot of feedback I've seen online so far assumes Sojourn will still be the best DPS in the game, and maybe that's even true at a high level. I just think the gaps of time where Sojourn's actually useful is up far less often, because I think the 10 damage on her primary was legit, but 9 is like Resident Sleeper. And with rail less often, there's gonna be bigger gaps for a lot of other DPS to do something against a Sojourn and not be outpaced by the rate she can railgun everyone. But time will tell who's more right on that point, and I think it's highly skill tier depending as well. My assumption is maybe she's still the best at the highest tiers, but not as oppressive everywhere else. And the last change was to Kiriko. An interesting point Alec mentioned, they're really trying to change the perception of Kiriko being a heal bot playstyle, adding a gap of time where you can't cast Healing of Fuda again, but you can sneak in kunai. I love this change as concept, and also a cool thing that he mentioned was they don't want to nerf the healing amount, because then it'll feel like you have to heal more. Now, he didn't explain this, but what I think he means is when they lowered Mercy's healing value down to 50 in Overwatch 1, it felt like healing between fights took forever, and it felt really bad for the Mercy player. Now, my opinion is when that value of single target heal is too high, then it's like impossible to sustain damage to get an elimination against it. Healing of Fuda heals 70 a second. I'm not sure what it averages out to now with the delay, but that was the old metric. And if you as Winston deal 60, well, you'll just never kill that one target, right? It's not possible. You can pressure the rest of her team, so you still have something to do, hitting multiple targets with cleave, but you just can't really make a meaningful impact against that heal, and you just have to run away. And if that's the case, then you need to burst damage. That's sort of the logic of the game. And that's where you get the Sojourns, Widows, Roadhogs being the only thing you can play. When asked about the most controversial ability in Kiriko's kit, I think, Protection Suzu, Alec Dawson dropped the hammer in saying it's doing exactly what we want it to do. Reason being, Overwatch heroes are supposed to be able to do powerful things. And before you get your tomatoes out to throw at your screens, hear me out. I agree with him. And maybe I'm biased now as a support player, but I just feel the support role is the role that's always going to have the strategy element of the game, because tank is all about being a Giga Chad now. And if we want this game to be a balanced hero shooter with MOBA stuff mixed in, where else is it gonna go? Suzu is kind of whack in that it is like multiple things at once. Invulnerability to both the damage and crowd control and a cleanse of anything that was on you before. So that just makes it good against everything. But the alternative might be that it is so situational that you only can use it in certain matchups. Like if the enemy doesn't have anti and all you do is cleanse, well, do you even need Kiriko? And is she only going to get played when the enemy is playing the thing you counter? And it's just kind of goofy, right? Like you kind of need the character to work in more situations than just good against one thing. And in my opinion anyway, Kiriko's main overpowered attribute has already been nerfed. Her ultimate in season 1, that to me was the main thing. Suzu was nice and good and protected your team and did everything it was supposed to do, but I don't think that was what was outrageous. I think it felt more outrageous in season 2 because Roadhog was the tank. Using Suzu to protect a more tank-focused tank rather than the one-shot kill one doesn't feel unfair to me, because there's lots of ways to save your tank. And if it's only used to do that, it's like objectively worse than Heal Nade, actually. Applying Heal Nade to your tank is way more sustain than Suzu gives. It's not a hot take, this is just math, okay? The only reason Suzu was better is because it was attached to the Roadhog, who's got to self-heal and doesn't need your healing. Okay, you can sound off on me in the comment section down below. I don't know. Maybe it's the MOBA fan in me, but I just want some of that to retain in the game, and I like Overwatch for what I think it is, which is a mixed game that's got a bit of everything in it. I don't want it to be too much of one thing ever. And if you remove Immortality Field and Suzu and Blue Beam and all these other support kit from the game, are we just going to play Valorant then, where everything's like an offensive ability? That's not to my tastes anyway. Though obviously I admit Suzu and Hog was dumb. Okay, the balance was wrong, but it's not the concept that I hate. In fact, I think Kiriko was like a masterpiece of Overwatch design. Really awesome character. Support player bias. We all love the characters we find it easy to rank up on, maybe. Guys, that's everything for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to leave it a like. And if you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe and the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. Got a lot more content planned in 2023, and assuming the balance of the game gets figured out, I'm gonna be a lot more excited to play again. I can't wait to jump back into the game and start testing out these changes in a live environment myself. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next.